Resident Evil Code Veronica. This is one that I've not played before, but I've only heard the stories. The game is notorious for its difficulty, as well as being a game where you could save yourself into unwinnable situations. I was kind of dreading covering this game just because I heard that this one was such a bad time for so many people. But I'm curious to see if it actually is worth it, because not a lot of people, I feel like, revisit or talk about this one compared to like 1 and 2 and even 3, for example. But let's see what Resident Evil Code Veronica is all about.
Resident Evil.
Code Veronica was released in February of 2000 for the Sega Dreamcast. This is the first Resident Evil game to not appear on a Sony console. The development for Code Veronica is quite interesting. Code Veronica began as an attempt to port Resident Evil 2 to the Sega Saturn, but after longer development times, it was shifted to the new Sega Dreamcast. As Resident Evil 3 was being developed around the same time, that game was intended to be a spin-off, while Code Veronica was intended to be the true sequel to RE2 and the series as a whole. The events of the game follow a few months after where Resident Evil 2 left off, with Claire Redfield traveling to Europe to find her brother, Chris, who went there to shut down Umbrella once and for all. The introduction to this game is absolutely wild, with Claire starring in her own action movie basically with all these insane shots and jumps.
Don't move.
She ends up getting captured and put in prison on Rockford Island, an Umbrella-controlled facility in the Southern Ocean. The facility has had a zombie outbreak, and Claire starts her journey to escape the island and also to find Chris. Code Veronica at its core is still a Resident Evil game. Fixed camera angles, limited saves and ammo, everything in the classic style we all know and love, including the herbs, of course.
You know, the last time I talked about herbs, I kind of mixed them incorrectly, because when you mix herbs in the game, it looks more like this, so... Still good.
There's a few advancements here that I think work pretty well. The camera, while still at fixed points, does more to follow the player or zoom in on certain areas to make it feel more dynamic. There are multiple maps and zones that you revisit, and I quite like the dynamic of a larger area to explore. Graphically, this is definitely a step up from the pre-rendered backgrounds of the PS1 era. Character models also look smoother and more detailed. We get more complex cutscenes here, which also help show the detail. As this game is the first to not be in Raccoon City, the setting and art style takes a more European approach, featuring Gothic-styled art and set pieces, alongside the theme of the antagonist, which is more rooted in a classical family bloodline. And this story is really something else, even for Resident Evil. The campy acting and writing is ever present here to be sure. The Dreamcast adds this great feature with the VMU. You get to see your health status as you're playing the game. This is a very minor feature, but it honestly did help me manage my health during boss fights without having to pause to check my health. And you get to see little pictures of Chris and Claire show up on it too. It's really cute. The story of this game definitely takes a very interesting approach. Early on, Claire is trying to escape Rockford Island and runs into a new character to the series, Steve. And let me just show you Steve's introduction.
Wah! Wait, don't shoot!
Who are you?
Huh? You're not a zombie. Well, great. Wait right there. I'm coming over. Sorry about that little misunderstanding, but I thought you were another one of those monsters.
Shut up. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry. My name's Steve. I was a prisoner on this island. And I'm guessing you're not from Umbrella either.
No, I'm Claire. Claire Redfield.
Yeah, Steve's lines and delivery in this game is really not great, and a lot of Resident Evil fans do not like Steve, myself included, admittedly. He's also a prisoner on the island because his father worked for Umbrella and got into some sort of trouble trying to sell secrets or something. But anyway, Steve shows up every now and then to try to help, and also has this like subplot romance with him and Claire, and it's kind of a mess. Alright, Steve. You got this.
Steve, watch out!
Steve?
No! It's toxic gas!
As you explore Rockford Island, you learn of the Ashford family, who help found Umbrella and also research their own mutations of the T-virus, called the T-Veronica virus in this game. So the head of the Ashford family was named Veronica, thus the name of the game, and Edward Ashford was one of the founders of Umbrella, and it's his children Alfred and Alexia that serve as the game's new antagonists. Alfred is set on bringing glory back to his family, while Alexia continues her father's research on the T-Veronica virus. And much like Steve, Alfred's voice actor is just having the time of his life.
Have it your way, then. You're just a rat in a cage anyway.
You progress the game to find how to escape the island with Steve. Combat in this game feels the same as prior entries. Very early on, Claire finds dual-wield machine guns, which can hit 2 enemies at once if you're good. Her classic bow gun is here too, with the ability to make explosive rounds that pack a real punch. The one thing I appreciate is that different weapons are more effective against different enemies. The shotgun is great against hunters, the bow gun is great for the Bandersnatches for long-range attacks, and so on. The knife is actually really useful in this game too. I found good success using it against the dogs to save ammo. As you progress to leave Rockford Island, Alfred sends out a tyrant to stop you, and as you get on a plane to leave the island, you get greeted with one of the more infamous boss fights in Resident Evil. I had heard a lot about how this boss is very difficult. This part of the game was painfully easy, and let me tell you, it gives you not 1, not 2, but 3 save opportunities before you fight the tyrant. And even if you die, the save point is literally right before the boss fight, with an item box too. The fight itself is very cramped, so I get it, and he will kill you in like 1 to 2 hits, but I found it really fun to defeat the tyrant by weakening it and then launching it out of the plane. Claire and Steve escape, but alas, Alfred sets the autopilot of the plane to redirect to an Umbrella base in Antarctica. After the plane arrives and crashes, that is the end of Disc 1.
At this part of my playthrough, this is where tragedy struck, as I found out that my Disc 2 of the game that I have is heavily scratched and it just won't play. And I was devastated that I'd have to restart on Code Veronica X version or, like, do something. So, in my moment of desperation, I did the quickest solution I could think of. I burned a copy of Disc 2. It turns out that the Dreamcast has about 0 protection for piracy, so it's really easy to just literally burn a game file on a disc and just put the disc in the system and it'll run. I do want to say I do own Resident Evil Code Veronica, it's just that my Disc 2 was scratched and this is the solution I had. But I just felt like a tech wizard doing this, as I'm sure everyone else in the early 2000s felt.
Now, Claire and Steve have to escape the Antarctic base, which also has had a zombie outbreak. This is where the hardest part of the game was, which if you know this game, you'll know about this dreaded hallway with the poison moths. You have to run through this hallway multiple times, and these moths constantly respawn. If they hit you once, they lay an egg on your back that once it hatches, you get poisoned. Thankfully, there's an infinitely spawning blue herb planter in the hallway, but what it turns into is a constant loop of running through this hallway, getting poisoned, loading a new room, watch the egg hatch, then run back to use the blue herb, and leave without getting hit. This was so hard and so frustrating. The worst room in any Resident Evil game I've ever played, period. And that's including all the spiders I've fought before. I'm cool with spiders now. Get these mods out of here. Eventually you progress enough to leave the Antarctic base, but alas, Alexia has woken up from her self-imposed coma and is infected with the T-Veronica virus. She has the ability to shoot these really long tentacles that just zoom out and attack Claire and Steve and leave them seemingly for dead. Do we get to see their fate? No, because it's time to finally meet Chris, and he's here to save his sister. Much like how Resident Evil 2 featured 2 campaigns, Code Veronica switches between Claire and Chris a few times. I quite liked the flow that made it really feel like their stories were happening at the same time. Chris starts at Rockford Island after its destruction when Claire leaves. Chris discovers information about the Ashfords himself, but also is met with an old adversary, Wesker. Yes, that Wesker. He is alive and is now working as an independent contractor tasked with getting a sample of the T. Veronica virus. He also now has superhuman strength and reflexes, which looks super cool. You both find out that Claire and Alexia are in Antarctica, and you both separately make your way there. One thing I should note is that the whole way that Chris finds out where Claire is that Claire sends an email to Leon, her friend of course from Resident Evil 2, and then Leon's the one who sends the message along to Chris. I don't understand why Claire didn't just email Chris directly, but I don't know, it was the year 2000. Once in Antarctica, Chris finally meets up with Claire, something that we've been looking forward to ever since Resident Evil 2, and their reunion is great. But it's cut short as they are separated again, with Claire tasked with finding Steve and Chris left to deal with Alexia. At this point, I realize that the footstep sound effect is in cutscenes and it can be really distracting.
Just go. I'll be fine.
But Chris...
You've got to save Steve. Go!
At this point, this is the last time you play as Claire in the game. It's a rather short section, but you locate Steve, but find out he's been experimented on and has been injected with the T. Veronica virus. He transforms into this big lizard guy, and you gotta hightail it out of there because he will kill you in like 1 or 2 hits. He's about to finish off Claire, but he comes to his senses and ends up saving her from the giant tentacle before dying. He confesses his love for her, and Claire sheds a few tears in his memory. Meanwhile, you snap back to Chris and have to fight Alexia, who completely bodies Wesker before fighting you. He hightails it out of there, and then it's on. This fight is also pretty well known, just because of the abruptness and reliance of your item management beforehand. And honestly, this one is really easy as well, as long as you just don't get grabbed, because it's a one-hit shot. Chris soon meets up back with Claire, who tells him of the facility's self-destruct sequence. You go to activate it, and it needs a password, a code if you will. And of course, the code is Veronica. This then triggers the final boss of the game, which is pretty straightforward if you don't just stand in one place for too long, because it sprouts out these tiny little bugs that constantly berate you. And with one final RPG type shot, Alexia is destroyed and you escape with Claire.
Chris!
Hey, you know that I always keep my promises.
The most noteworthy aspect of this game for me is how difficulty is presented in the game. The US version of the game does not have any difficulty options. This game can definitely be hard. Multiple times I was reloading saves to run through parts of the game more efficiently once I learned what I needed to do. And that level of borderline tediousness can be a deterrent for some. There's definitely an argument that Resident Evil games are more fun after your first playthrough, and Code Veronica is no exception. On the other hand, good lord, this game just throws items at you. This game is almost balanced perfectly in its health distribution. I had just enough herbs and first aid sprays to finish the game, and the ammo was very generous. It's also extremely generous with ink ribbons. I had like 20 ink ribbons left after being very liberal with them, and I saved a lot in this game because I was afraid of locking items with certain characters. There was a time that I had left all my good weapons in my item box that coming back to that part where Chris has to immediately fight Alexia, I didn't have anything on me, so I had to reload to save to better distribute items and replay the whole bit with Claire rescuing Steve and all that. This is where the difficulty lies in Code Veronica. Just make sure that if you save often and don't overwrite your old saves, and you will be fine. I say that despite the fact that I left the empty fire extinguisher on Rockford Island way back at the beginning of the game, and then way at the end of the game you need it with Chris to be able to get the Magnum. For a split second I thought I had ruined everything, but thankfully it's not mandatory. I just had to beat the game without the best gun, which is fine. I felt that this game might be the least scary of the games I've played so far as well. There are things to fear in this game, like jump-scared enemies popping out or the threat of what could be in the next room, but overall, with my seemingly countless ammo, I was never really concerned. I did like these motion sensor lights that spawn hunters if you get seen though, those gave me a good fright. But this definitely feels like the first descent into a less scary game compared to those feelings of dread in the previous entries, with the mystery behind everything in Resident Evil 1, or the seemingly creepy atmosphere of Resident Evil 2, and 3 with the threat of Nemesis behind every corner. This game was still spooky in a way, but I felt it was more so like an action survival, more so than like a survival horror. However, compared to the other games, this game is dark, like really dark, and it made it so hard to see sometimes. At release, Code Veronica got a fair share of promotion and limited edition merchandise. Most notably are the 2 special edition Dreamcast consoles, a pink Claire Redfield edition and an even more rare blue Stars edition. I would contemplate murder for either of these.
Capcom knew that Resident Evil's future couldn't just survive on the Sega Dreamcast, so about a year later they released this, Resident Evil Code Veronica X for the PlayStation 2. This version of the game does have some additional cutscenes, mostly to explain Wesker's involvement with the overall plot, and other re-releases of Code Veronica on PS3 and Xbox Live, for example, are based on this version. But that's one thing that puzzles me, is that this is also one of the only, probably the only, like, classic Resident Evil game that isn't available on Steam or digital storefronts elsewhere. It's kind of sad that this is such an important piece of the major, like, umbrella arc of Resident Evil, and it's one of the hardest, like, it's one of the ones that's the least accessible, I should say. I don't really know why they don't have it. Is it because the story is really outlandish? Is it because it's not as popular or sold less? Even like Resident Evil 0 is available on Steam, but this one isn't. I really think that it does deserve some sort of either HD remake or port. A lot of people are saying that Resident Evil 4 doesn't deserve the remake treatment and they should do this one first. And part of me kind of agrees. I think that Resident Evil 4 holds up extremely well today still, especially its PC port, and this one, not a lot enough people have played. So Capcom, what's the deal here? Let's see it.
Another thing to note is that Code Veronica X version specifically has a glitch where you can get infinite health or infinite ammo within the first 10 minutes of the game. So if you're really having trouble, play this version, exploit the glitch, and have fun. Compared to the previous Resident Evil entries, this one definitely feels tonally separated in its lackluster story involving the Ashford family, to the difference in setting and lack of overall danger. And I think that's its weakest part, and the reason why it's often overlooked, with its minimal new features to the formula not enough to resonate as much as the other titles. Looking at Code Veronica as a sequel to Resident Evil 2 makes a lot of the design choices and features make more sense. Shinji Mikami once said that Code Veronica was about 50 to 60% of what his true vision was for Resident Evil, with the implication that future entries would further express his creative vision for the series. This game has a lot of content. After you beat the game, you unlock a battle mode that you can even play in first person. This is kind of like Mercenaries, and it's very okay. You get to play as Steve and Wesker though, so that's kinda cool. Other than that though, the main game is lengthy, or at least it feels like it. Difficulties aside, this is another solid entry in the Resident Evil series. I would recommend it if you like the PS1 trilogy or just want a good survival horror challenge. It can be very ridiculous at times, but I still had a good experience here despite the issues that I ran into.
And that is Resident Evil Code Veronica. Do I think this game is worth it? It does have a level of fun to have. I definitely understand the frustration that there could be. I myself was in a bit of a tizzy just trying to play this game, but it is fun, it is enjoyable, definitely more so of a challenge if you are not already familiar with the classic games, and despite everything, I think it was still a lot of fun, admittedly, and I would revisit it probably on the Code Veronica X version next time. But what do you think about Code Veronica? Is it really like the black sheep of the classic Resident Evil series? Is it maybe your favorite of the classic Resident Evil series? But let me know, and in the meantime, take care.